Hello, welcome everyone to this week's Alteryx Challenge walkthrough. My name is Lisa. I'm an Alteryx and Tableau consultant at the Information Lab. And for this week's challenge, we're looking at data about Alteryx challenges and how many users have completed how many challenges. With that, let's jump directly into Alteryx itself. I have already opened it up. You can download it from the community forum. And let's just run this just to see we can see the data. So we have two tasks this week. The first task is to calculate the days that the Alteryx challenges have been in existence. So basically calculate the difference in days between the earliest and the oldest date of any of the posts that were posted on the forums. And then the second task is to find the top 15 users, so the users who posted as many challenges as possible. And with that, let's have a look at how our data looks like before we dive in. So we see we have 3 columns here, and we have about 135,000 rows. So each row is a user who submitted a particular challenge to their forums, and we see the challenge number, what date and time that challenge was posted, and the username. Now, when I think about the first task, what first comes to my mind is that I want to find the very earliest date that's in this whole data set and the very latest date. So the minimum date and the maximum date so that I can calculate the difference between the two. I do have this post time column that already shows me the date here in the very first part. And then I have the T, which stands for time. And then after that, I have the time. Now I'm only interested in that very first part. So I want to first extract that so that I can work with that. You can use, if you're more advanced, you can use regex to do this in a single step, but I'm going to do this with the text to column tool so that that's also accessible for beginners. So I'm going to connect my data set to this. And to configure this, I want to first choose my post time column. And then the delimiter is basically where I want to cut my column and split it into 2 columns. So in this case, it is the T, the capital T. So I'm going to write this in here. And then I choose number of columns to be 2. Like I want it to split into 2 final columns. When I run this now, you see that I have 2 new columns, post time 1 and post time 2. And the T, our delimiter, disappeared. So post time 1 is what we're going to keep working on moving forward. That is our date. Now, this post time 1, if we go here to the metadata, we see that the post time 1 is a string type, and we want this to be a date type. To do this, we can use the date time tool. I'm going to connect this here. Now we just have to make sure that we choose the right column. So I want to say post time 1. And you have to specify the format of the string that is coming into the tool, and then it will output the normal date type. So here in this drop-down menu down here, I can choose the format, and in this case, it is 4 times year dash month dash day. If you have other formats, you can choose them here, or you can choose a custom format, but it has to match exactly the format that is coming in here in your column, in this case, post time 1. I'm going to call the new column date, and I'm going to run it. Okay, now we see we have here a new column called date. It does look exactly the same as our post time 1 column. However, if I go into the metadata, I see that post time 1 was a string type, and this is a date type. By the way, if you were to try and use a select tool to change the type from string to date, Tableau, in this case, may recognize it, but in other cases, it may not recognize it as a date because the format might be different. It, for example, uses forward slashes instead of dashes or something like that. So I always err on the safe side, and I always use the date time tool. Okay, now let's look at our data again. Okay, so now we need to do what I mentioned before, where we look at the minimum date and the maximum date across the whole data set. So I'm going to use a summarize tool, and I connect it here. And I just make sure you choose the right column or use a select tool before you do the step to clean up your columns. But I'm going to use that date column we just created. And under the add button, I say min and max. And you see the field that's going to be created is called min date and max date, which is exactly what I want. I'm going to run this. And now I only have one row with 2 columns, which is our min date and our max date, our earliest and oldest date. So we have, or earliest and most recent date, I guess. So we're like November 2015 to August 2024. I know the Alteryx challenges, they're still, of course, ongoing, but this is just the most recent data that we have. So nearly 10 years. That's pretty impressive. Okay, now we need to calculate the difference in days between those two. So I'm going to expect an outcome of about 3,000 something days, probably, about 10 years times 350 days. And I can use the formula tool to do that. We have a function called datetime_div, and it gives us the format how we have to enter our values. So we first have to give one date, then a second date, and then we want to specify the units that we want our outcome to be. So I'm going to say max date, min date. So take the difference between the max and the min, and units in single quotation marks, I write day. Now I say add column here at the top, and I call this, let's actually check the output to see how they call it, day count. Okay, so I'm going to call this add column day count. I'm going to zoom in so that you have that calculation. And here at the bottom where it says data type, you do want to change that probably to an integer. And run. And now we see day count is 3,203. Let's see if that's what our solution says. Not quite. It says 3,202. Now, why might that be happening? The datetime div is exclusive of the min date. So if you want to go to the Alteryx help pages, where you can find all of the functions in Alteryx, you see that there is the datetime div, and there's an example here, for example, that has January 15th to 18th, and that is 3 days. So it is not inclusive of the min date, but it is inclusive of the max date. But in our case, we want it to be lower, right? We don't want to count those dates. So instead of 3,203, we want to have 3,202. So what we can do, since it's an integer, we can simply subtract one, which would then be exclusive of that min date. So I run, and I have that, and now I only need to clean it up. So I deselect my min and max date, just put in a browse tool at the end. And now when we run this, we should have the exact same output that is required for task 1. All right. Now that we have that, let's go to task 2. So as I said before, we want to find the top 15 users who had the most challenges. If I want to group by something, or like if I want to count something on a certain level, and that level is a higher level than what my data is. So what I mean by that is here we have one user has multiple rows, but now I want to count those rows by user. For each user, how many rows do I have? I immediately think summarize tool. I'm going to drag my summarize tool in here. I'm going to connect my data. Oops. Okay, let's open this up a bit more. And as I just said, we want to group by our user. And now we want to count the challenges. Now, it could be potentially that someone posts the same challenge multiple times. For example, you post it and you forgot that you posted it and you post it again, or you posted it and you forgot to attach your file and then you post it again with the file. So I just want to make sure that I select the challenge number and then I say count distinct. And when I run this, I will get for each user how many challenges that user has submitted. There you go. Now we can clean this up a little bit. So here at the very end, at the solution, we see we want it to be called top 15 users and count. So I can already rename those columns here. Top 15 users. And then my short-term memory is very bad. What did I say? Count. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. There you go. Let me run this again. Okay. Now, we still don't have the top 15 users right now, right? So we need to first sort it in descending order. So we have the users with the most challenges on top, and then we can cut it off at 15 users. So I'm going to use the sort tool first. I attach it. I choose my count, and I'm going to do descending order. I run just to double check everything is working. It is working perfectly. Now I want to cut it off here after 15 users. So I can use for that my sample tool. Sample takes a sample of our data set. And here in the configurations, I choose first n rows. And then instead of n equals 100, I'm going to change this to n equals 15. And I run it. I attach my browse tool. Could have done that before I run it. And now I see that I have the top 15 users, and a couple of them have done 437 challenges, which was at the time of last August. So this is incredibly impressive. I can double check with my solution and we can see it is the exact same solution. And that's this week's challenge. I hope you had fun. Again, this is just one solution. There are many, many different solutions. So if you have a different solution, please feel free to put them into the comments. And I am excited to see how you solve this challenge. See you soon.